Good morning, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of This Week in Magic Online Finance. I'm your host, Chaz Andres, and as always, we're going to get started with the biggest story of the week. This week, well, it still has to be Modern Horizons, right? We now know the entire contents of the set, which releases on MTGO on June 13th, just 10 short days from now. So, if you've kind of dipped out on the Modern Horizons coverage, now's the time to take another look. Go on and take a look at the spoiler. Come back. I'll wait. So, yeah, Modern Horizons is a pretty cool set, right? I mean, I think so. There's a lot of haters on the internet who are kind of upset about, they thought it was going to do a lot more for Modern than it's doing, but honestly, I think this is really just a result of the fact that most of the mythic rares in the set are a little bit disappointing outside of Commander. But this is a good thing. See, there's a lot of rares in Modern Horizons that are going to be good in Modern, and if you as a competitive player don't have to worry too much about the mythic rares, well, that makes this whole endeavor a lot cheaper for you. Rares are always going to be cheaper than mythic rares, so if most of the cards that you need are rare, guess what? You're spending less money on Modern Horizons staples. So, what cards out of Modern Horizons do you, the modern player, need to buy? Well, that's going to depend a lot on what kinds of decks you have, what kinds of decks you like to play. Modern Horizons, it doesn't have a ton of universal staples. There's not a lot of cards in the set that everybody needs to own. Instead, it's things that are going to help enable second, third, and fourth tier decks to gain a lot of power and versatility. It's not really going to help out Modern's top tier as much as it's going to help those next few tiers gain a little bit of traction in the metagame. And what that means is that you probably don't need to buy every interesting Modern card in Modern Horizons. You can pick and choose. As with most sets on Magic Online, you probably don't want to buy into Modern Horizons on day one. Wait 3 or 4 days and then start to take a look at the singles market and see how it's shaking out. The more sought after staples are probably still going to be too expensive, but that's maybe the best time to take a look at the more under the radar cards you think you're going to need. Because, after a while, those cards are going to start going up in price, but right away they might be a little bit more lost in the shuffle. It's also worth remembering that whenever a new set is released on MTGO, especially a new set that a lot of people are going to need to buy a lot of cards from, everything else in the market tends to drop. People sell their extra staples and standard and modern and legacy in order to buy into new cards. So if you're planning to do that, if you've got cards that you just want to sell in order to get some extra tickets to buy into Modern Horizons, do that selling now. Get in ahead of the rush. You don't want to be the last person selling their, thought seizes or surgical extractions or whatever, because you're going to get less money 10 days from now than you're going to get now for a lot of these cards. The big exception to this rule is the Horizon land cycle. You're gonna want Collector Roof if you play green, and you're gonna want Kaya's Guile if you play Esper Control. You're gonna want Unsettled Mariner if you play, humans or merfolk, or maybe even slivers. But everyone's going to want the Horizon lands. It's probably the second most important cycle of lands in Modern now, just after the fetch lands, even above the shock lands. So definitely make sure that you grab these at some point over the next couple of months. No matter what style of decks you're going to end up playing, you're probably going to need these lands. Let's move on now to Gaining Ground, where in Standard, the card that gained the most ground this week was Finale of Promise, gaining about 4 tickets from 11 up to 15. And Finale of Promise has actually been gaining ground for a while now, but it was only this week that it became the most expensive mythic rare in War of the Spark. Teferi Time Raveler is the only other card from the set above the 10 ticket mark right now, and Karn has been hanging out around the 10 ticket mark, but Finale of Promise, I don't even think it's done growing. The price chart is still pointing up, and I wouldn't be surprised if it ends up around the 20 ticket mark by this time next week. So, why Finale of Promise? Well, I think it's the confluence of 3 separate factors. First, Izzet Phoenix is actually a deck in Standard again. Not a great deck, not a tier 1 deck, that's essentially just mono red and nothing else right now, but it's a second or third tier option. More importantly, the modern version of Izzet Phoenix is playing at least 1 or 2 copies of Finale of Promise in the main deck, and that's a pretty big game because Modern is the engine that drives Magic Finance on MTGO right now. Third, well, the set redemption math has to work for War of the Spark, which means that some mythic in the set is going to have to be valuable. And Finale of Promise seems like the most modern, viable mythic in War of the Spark at the moment, so it can be expensive for a while. Let's move over to Modern now, where this week's biggest gainer was last week's biggest loser. I'm talking about Horizon Canopy, which gained about 5 tickets this week from 18 up to 23. And in fact, that price chart is continuing to point up, and I wouldn't be surprised if it fully recovers by this time next week. I'm expecting it to end up back around the 30 ticket range, so now's a pretty good chance to buy in if you've been meaning to. Honestly, there wasn't really a good reason for Horizon Canopy to drop in price in the first place. I mean, maybe people thought it was going to be reprinted in Modern Horizons, even though that's not how Modern Horizons works. Maybe they thought it would just be replaced by other Horizon lands, even though that's not how, two-color lands work. Either way, Horizon Canopy is really important in Modern. It's going to continue being important in Modern. It's going to continue to be priced like it's important in Modern going forward, so pick these up if you've been meaning to. Let's move on now to our biggest losers, where in Standard it was Nexus of Fate, dropping 3 tickets from 8 down to 5, matching its historic low price point. And this drop just so happens to coincide with Nexus decks sort of disappearing from Standard, being replaced by Simic Mass Manipulation and 4-color Dread Horde and these other decks that are performing better. Honestly, Simic or Bant Nexus might make a comeback at some point, but this is a strategy on the wane right now. So at this point, it might actually be worth picking up a Nexus or 4 if you don't have them in your collection. It's not my favorite spec, but this is a card that's never gone below 5 tickets before, the price chart appears to have bottomed out, and it's essentially a lottery ticket based on, Nexus becoming relevant again alongside Core Set 2020, or literally at any point in the future of Modern. I mean, I don't think Wizards of the Coast is printing this card again, so if you've been holding off on these, now's an okay time to buy in. Let's move back over to Modern, where Mycosynth Lattice was our biggest loser of the week, dropping 14 full tickets from 49 all the way down to 35. And hey, that means that last week's biggest loser was this week's biggest gainer and vice versa, and yeah, the Magic Online economy these days sure is kind of swingy, right? Now, I told you last week that Mycosynth Lattice was finally showing some signs of peaking and leveling off after 4 straight weeks of gains, so here's hoping you sold. I didn't expect it to drop this far, I didn't expect it to drop this fast, but that's just what happens sometimes. And at this point, it's sort of about just holding our collective breaths and seeing where this thing shakes out. The card is still very good. It is still just as important in card and combo and Vintage and Legacy and Modern as it was last week, so at this point I wouldn't be surprised if there are multiple weeks of massive fluctuations until eventually the price levels off. I don't know where or when that's going to be, so I just sort of hold tight and let the ride do its thing for a while. Now, my kitty cat Coraline was very uninterested in doing Sneak of the Week with me this week, unfortunately, so instead I've enlisted the help of my friend, this hungry hippo. Hey! Anyway, the Sneak of the Week this week is Ilarg the Rage Boar, another mythic from War of the Spark. Ilarg is actually seeing some modern play in a deck called Goryo's Vengeance. It's the pig version of Goryo's Vengeance. It's a really fun and good deck. Not tier 1, but Ilarg sees play in it as a 4 of, and that means it's got some potential. The card has gone up about 3 tickets from 5 up to 8 over the past couple of weeks, and the potential for future gains is there. So if you've been holding off on picking up your Ilargs for Modern, now's the time, right? As always, we're going to end the week by taking a look at the MTGO Trader sales data over the past 7 days. And this gives us a great idea about which cards are the most popular right now, regardless of price increases or decreases. Now, in terms of overall sales by price, it's actually a standard card at the top of this list for the first time in a while. Arclight Phoenix? No. It's actually Teferi Time Raveler, arguably the best card in War of the Spark. Teferi's price chart on MTGO has been really stable for the past couple of weeks, but its underlying metrics are good, demand is really high, so the price might actually start to go up at some point soon. I'd definitely start thinking about picking these up if you haven't already. Looking at overall sales by volume, things seem to be more or less back to normal. Narset Parter of Veils is the number 1 card by a fairly wide margin, and you should really pick these up sooner rather than later. Beyond that, it's a lot of cheap modern staples, things like Lightning Bolt, Path to Exile, and Faithless Looting, and this is pretty much how it usually is, and it really speaks to how Modern is absolutely the format of choice on MTGO these days. And that's all I've got for you this week. Thank you so much for watching. My name is Chaz Andres, and I will be back next Monday morning for another episode of This Week in Magic Online Finance.